Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going back to our roots and reading regular Let's Not Meet stories. And it seemed like many of you enjoyed it during the Unresolved Mysteries video, so I've decided Inner Scare Wifey is going to read another story in this episode. So the first story will be read by her, and then after that, the rest will be read by me. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories.
Five huge armed men looking for prey. Hi, I'm a young girl living in Iran, and I've made this an account to post the things that could threaten my safety if they were posted on my main account. As you probably already know, Iran's going through a revolution, and people have been protesting again for 2 months straight now. People often chant, "Down with the dictator," from their windows at night here. Tonight they had just stopped when I decided to go for a smoke. I went to the main street, which is less than 50 meters away from my home. I wasn't wearing a hijab, and to be honest, I was paranoid about it all the time. But everything went perfectly normal, and I turned around to go back home, thinking I'm being too scared these days. Halfway through the alley, I noticed a group of 5 huge men. One of them was holding a speaker that was playing one of our protest songs. 2 of them were shooting laser beams into windows at each side of the alley, and the others had guns. They were the Islamic Republic's forces baiting people to come to their windows. I couldn't look at them when they got closer. I just held my breath and walked past them while my heart was about to jump out of my chest. It didn't take more than a minute, and I was only a few meters away from home. Yet it felt like forever, and at that instant, I was almost certain I'm not going to get home. I was terrified, and all alone there were these huge armed men looking for probably the most peaceful protesters ever, walking towards me while I wasn't wearing hijab. I don't know if they really minded me or not, but regardless, it was absolutely horrifying for me. Thank you for all your kind words.
My entire primary school experience felt like a fever dream, but I don't think I could fit all into a post. So instead, I'm choosing to tell the most bizarre experience in my schooling life. In my school, the language sub that I was taking had teachers leaving almost every 3 months. Some due to finding a job with higher wages. This teacher, however, left due to his disturbing attitudes towards the kids, ages 8 to 10 years old. This teacher is Mr. John. He came to our school during the 2nd semester of grade 5, my class. He was not only a language teacher, but a PE and arts teacher as well, despite not having any experience in either fields. At first, he made a good impression, cracking jokes and giving helpful advice. However, one day he started deterring to very mature topics while he was teaching. He would talk about paintings, but somehow divert the conversation to body odor, and what kind of object would emit such terrible smells such as excrements. He would go too much into detail about excrements, nothing you learn from biology, to the point where it's not funny but disturbing. He later talked about puberty, which at first seemed normal, but later talked about how puberty changes you, such as your body parts and other feelings you get. We were 8. He then showed pictures of his ex-girlfriend when she was 17. She was getting married. He had her photos in a file on his computer. The final blow was him taking off his shirt and showing every scar and injury that was inflicted on him. He forced us to look at all of them. We were so uncomfortable. Finally, I complained to the principal along with a few others. He tried to find those who complained about him. He asked around and interrogated 2 of my friends. This teacher was unhinged. To Mr. John, let's not meet. I recently came across this sub, and oh boy do I have a story that fits. For context, this happened 20 years ago just after Christmas. I had turned 6 a month prior. My mom went out one day and left my then 16-year-old cousin to look after me and my 2 older siblings, brother 8, sister 11. My cousin decided to take us out into the city, which was 10 minutes from where we lived. We took the bus, walked around the city in incredibly unsafe neighborhoods with basically another child responsible for us, and after a few hours got tired and decided to go home. The city had a central area for buses. Not a bus station, but like a huge perfectly square field with some plants and flowers and bushes. Lining all 4 sides along the street were a couple bus stops and benches, so basically you could catch several buses from that area going all over the county/city. Since it was just after Christmas, the bushes along the field were still covered in Christmas lights. As we waited for the bus, I began to wonder away as I admired the lights. My cousin none the wiser. At some point, I heard a man say hi. I looked up from the bush and he was smiling down at me. Thinking back on it, once I got older, it was clear he was homeless and was probably on drugs. He had longish brown hair that was wet, teeth that were black along the gums, and his clothes were incredibly dirty and torn, and he had several jackets on. None of this really registered in my 6-year-old brain, so I just smiled back up and said hi. He asked if I liked looking at the lights, and I said yes, they're pretty. He said, I'll never forget this exact sentence. If you like Christmas lights, I've got some really cool lights at my house you'll love. Want to come see them? I eagerly said yes. So he reached down his hand to me and I took it. We started to walk away and we're headed to the corner of the field where a few big buildings were. He said his apartment was just a couple blocks away, so we were headed around the corner of the building when my arm jerked backwards and I turned to see my sister pulling me away from him. He didn't say a single word, just took off instantly running. It took a few years for me to fully grasp the danger that I was in. My sister and brother talked about what happened a lot and how scary it was. When I finally got a little older, I appreciated how terrifying this all was, and how close I was to having my life change, or end forever. If I had rounded that city corner with them, they never would have been able to find me in time, because they wouldn't even know where to start looking before we disappeared around the corner into the city. It's something we still bring up sometimes to this day. To that homeless man, let's not meet again. I found this thread, so I thought that I would share my experience. This happened when the Night Stalker show was really big on Netflix, so it was fresh in our mind because we were watching it. Earlier in the day, I was in my room with my dogs and roommate when we thought we heard the door open. We didn't think much of it until my roommate left the room a few minutes later and started screaming, and I heard the dog that followed her going nuts. The front door was wide open, and somebody saw her and fled. They had been in our house, and presumably heard us in the room chatting while doing who knows what. The dog ran the person off. We were really startled, but we figured that it was over and started locking the door, and that was that. Later that night, as we were watching the last episode of the Night Stalker show, we heard the doorknob jiggle. It's like 2 a.m., so we paused and looked at the door, kind of shook and confused. When it registered what was happening, my roommate started to yell for them to go away and that the police were coming. My dumb self isn't too fond of calling the police, so I hesitated, but then they started banging something against the door trying to break it down. I grabbed my roommate, the dogs, and my partner, and we all rushed into another room to put more doors between us while police were on the way. I also had to stop my partner from trying to go out with a sword because we didn't know what this person might have or be trying to do. Luckily, he couldn't break the door down before police arrived and he fled. They caught him and he fought, so he's in jail for a lot longer than he would have been. He admitted to police that he heard women when he came into the wrong house earlier, but no man, so he came back to, quote-unquote, find a friend. They never found the weapon he used on our door, and he won't say what it was, but it messed up the metal pretty badly. This happened Sunday night. I got into a huge fight with my mom, and it was very emotional and intense to say the least. We made up, said goodnight to each other, blah, blah, blah. But I was still angry. So my impulsive self decided I was going to take off for the night. I just wanted to cool off. I went into my backyard and hopped over one of our walls and started walking around. Mind you, it was midnight and I'm a teenage girl that is on the skinny side walking around in a not-so-well-lit area. I didn't even have a phone in case something happened or a weapon for self-protection. For a bit of a layout of my story, down the street from my house, which is a neighborhood road, there's a church and a preschool across from it. In front of the preschool, there are large tall hedges that sort of hide the pickup/drop-off that's in the front of the school. There's a stop sign on the church's corner, before the busy main road, and a street lamp on the same corner. I made my way from the corner on the church's side. I was very bored and cold, but it's not like I could call a friend to pick me up and hang out for the night. I decided to face the main road and put a hitchhiker's thumb up in hopes of someone pulling into the street and letting me use their phone to call a friend. After what felt like forever, I was getting no luck, and then I saw a guy across the main road and I called for him. I didn't have any weird feelings about him. He was harmless and he let me use his phone, but I still wasn't able to find any of my friends to come get me. Before he left, he asked if I had a knife on me or something. I said, honestly, I forgot mine at home. He handed me a small but very sharp switchblade and told me to keep it to stay safe and to have a good night. After watching him walk into the dark heading east, I wandered up and down the sidewalk as cars passed by often. I started to pass the hedges and I glanced over to the left of me where the school was. I saw a large silhouette of a man slowly creeping around in front of the doors to the small preschool. He was tall and looked like he was strong, broad shoulders too. It took me a second to realize he stopped and saw me too. I went into flight mode and immediately noped the hell out of there and ran across the busy street because it was empty at the moment, and I kept sprinting until I was 5 streets down and realized he wasn't following me. About 30 minutes had gone by and I decided it was time I made my way home. I eventually crossed the street and was facing the main road walking down to the church, and I take a left to get home. It was silent, and no cars had gone by for a few minutes at that point. Then I heard a car speeding down the road, and I turned my head back to see it was a large white Suburban. I dismissed it, thinking nothing of it, as I turned right a few streets down across the road. I started to run the corner under the street lamp, when I looked back up again and saw it was starting to come out of the same road it had just turned into. I'm not sure why or how my gut was telling me to run, but I did. I ran into the parking lot of the church and started to see headlights turn into the street. I threw myself onto the ground behind a ramp wall that was barely tall enough to hide me. Next thing I know, I'm about to cry because of how freaked out I was while trying to stay silent at the same time. because the Suburban's headlight reflected off the walls of the building as it passed into the parking lot. It made a few laps from what I could sneak a peek of, and stopped in the middle for a couple of minutes before it turned out and drove into the main road. I waited it out a bit longer and pulled the knife out, listening for anything and everything. Once I realized I was probably in the clear, I ran back home. Not sure exactly what was going on, but to whoever was in that white Suburban, let's not meet. This happened when I was young, approximately 8 to 10 years old. I remember it perfectly, but have confirmed the details with my mother, and the memory of it sends chills down both of our spines to this day. It was broad daylight on a Saturday, and I was in the town center with my mother. The streets were busy and people bustled past. We paused at a shop front that sold ornaments, the ugly, old-fashioned kind that old grannies liked. We'd often stop to look at them and laugh at how expensive they were, wondering how that place even stayed open. I was a real chatterbox as a kid and talking animatedly to my mother about something or another, facing her as I did so. Like it was yesterday, I remember her smiling face and how it suddenly dropped. Her jaw hung open and her eyes were as big as dinner plates. She just stared at me silently for a few seconds, and then grabbed my arm hard and pulled me away. Her fingers were digging into my arm as she dragged me into the crowd, walking as fast as she could without running. Being that kid, I squealed and loudly kept saying, "What are you doing? Ouch. Mom, you're hurting me. That hurts. Where are we going?" while trying to stop. She gritted her teeth and silently dragged me for about 3 streets before stopping somewhere less busy for a second. It was only then that she let go of my arm, rubbing it and looking extremely upset. Looking me dead in the eye, she explained that I was talking outside of the shop. She noticed an old man stood behind me. He was dirty and disheveled, like the horror movie stereotype of a creepy old man. I had pretty long hair as a little girl, and people stopped us all the time to remark on it, especially when I wore it loose. This old man had very gently lifted a handful of my hair in his hand and was smelling it, tickling his nose as he did so. I was clearly so absorbed in telling my story I hadn't even realized I was being touched. My mother made eye contact with the man as he opened his eyes while inhaling the smell of my hair. He gave her an absolutely nauseating toothy grin, quickly dropping my hair and waving at her, waggling his fingers all cutesy-like. "Whoopsie, you caught me," was the vibe, clearly knowing exactly what he did. He then disappeared into the throng of people moving past. My poor mother felt sick and just went into autopilot, dragging me away as fast as she could in the opposite direction. I didn't even know how to react when she told me what happened, except to be horrified and so glad that we had gotten away safely. I still walk past that shop, and the memory of my mother's haunted expression makes me feel ill. Creepy old man, let's not meet. Ever. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking would keep to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues until one evening. One evening, I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed by, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd, because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "F off or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone. Or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I call the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out my window and see them approach the tall dude. Tall dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but tall dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I give my version of the events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been SA-ing women. Thank God you didn't open that door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, tall, creepy dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. Hello everyone. I wanted to share my scary encounter that occurred just yesterday on the bus. So for a bit of context, I'm a college student. Without giving too many details, I'm a woman on the smaller side of average female height. I currently do not have a car, so I use my bike, walking, and the bus to get around. My college has a transit service that allows you to scan in with a student boarding pass for free. Other non-students are allowed to ride the bus by paying upon entering or purchasing a ticket beforehand. I frequently ride the bus for various reasons, grocery runs or treating myself to food. And yesterday I had the idea of treating myself to a movie after all the exams I've been having lately. I'm an avid horror fan, and I knew that Terrifier 2 was in theaters, so of course I wanted to see it immediately. One of my friends told me they found it funny and really enjoyed it, which was more than enough reason to go see it. Side note, it was good and hilarious, but if gore is not your thing, I do not recommend it. I was looking at tickets the day before yesterday and trying to decide which time slot I wanted to see the movie in. Looking back now, something in my gut told me to choose the earlier time. I wish I had listened. Another detail I wanted to add is that there are 2 bus sizes, a large one and a small one. The bus I rode during the incident was the smaller one. The stop where I got on the bus is the beginning of the route. Unlike every other stop, the driver usually parks the bus here for 5 minutes and gets off to use the restroom or have a quick break before continuing with the rest of the route. Upon entering the bus, I notice only 2 other passengers, another girl about my age and an older man. The girl was in the front of the bus on the right side, and the man was in the second row on the left side. I sat on the right side several rows back. I usually read something on my phone or listen to music on the bus, so I immediately got on my phone when I sat down. Everything was okay for a little bit until I looked up and noticed the man repeatedly staring at me and looking away before staring at me again. I was immediately apprehensive, but just brushed it off. He started speaking aloud out of nowhere, saying things like, "Beautiful baby," and "so damn fine," while staring at me. I was frozen out of fear and could only keep looking at my phone and trying to ignore it. This continued until I worked up the courage to say, "Sir, would you please stop staring at me?" To which he claimed he was not staring and just told me that I was extremely beautiful. Unsure of what to say, I just stupidly thanked him and went back on my phone. He had his body slightly turned, but when I confronted him, he faced fully forward. The driver got back on and we started moving again, so everything was calm for a bit, though I admittedly was still shaken up. This calm did not last long. Obviously, this creep couldn't contain himself and just had to voice his opinions about me out loud. He started saying similar things again, but also added some new phrases such as, "I'm gonna make you my wife." And by far the worst one, "I'm gonna get you pregnant." I was shaking at this point and was unsure what to do. I desperately wanted to sit next to the other girl, but did not want to pass by him to sit by her. We made it to 2 other stops before the girl got off and said sorry before leaving. My heart dropped to my stomach. The last thing I wanted was to be alone with this guy. Luckily, more people got on at this stop. A middle-aged couple and a guy about my age. In a panicked voice, I sort of shouted and asked the guy my age if he would sit with me. He was a bit confused but came to sit by me, and I immediately felt relief. The stress of the situation got to me and I broke down crying. I guess the creep took this as an indication to leave because he swiftly made his exit after that. The kind younger guy who sat next to me and began to comfort me. I'm so grateful he chose to ride the bus that day. The bus driver noticed the commotion and called me to the front to get information in order to make a report. He told me he couldn't hear anything, but that buses have video and would probably pick up what the creep was saying. He told me the same man had recently been kicked off for a similar incident, and that he would be reporting this immediately. For the rest of the ride, the younger guy and I talked about things like majors and other school-related stuff. I wanted to go into marine biology, and he is a graduate student in mechanical engineering. I made it to the movie. It was awesome, and back home safely. But I definitely learned a lesson. My boyfriend is going to help me look into some self-defense items, and he taught me a few fighting tactics. I'm still shaken just writing this, but actually really afraid to leave my room now. Sometimes it's easy to forget that creepy encounters with weirdos can happen at any time. They aren't just stories on the internet. This happened about 10 years ago. I was in graduate school at the time working on my master's degree for clinical social work. My practicum was at a confidential shelter which housed women and children seeking shelter from DV. As I was an intern, I worked a lot of late night shifts. After closing up the shelter, I headed home. It was after midnight and the roads were fairly empty. I lived in a smaller town at the time, so this was not unusual. As I approached the stoplight, I noticed a man a few yards away, walking towards the crosswalk. I suddenly felt very anxious and had an unsettling feeling, so I immediately locked my car doors. This was before I had a car with automatic locks. I usually drove without locking my car doors as I never felt unsafe while doing so. I felt better after having locked my doors and pulled up to the red light. Staring ahead, I noticed the man never crossed the street. I glanced to my right where I had seen him earlier and came face to face with his face pressed up against my passenger side window. I screamed, honked my horn and told him to go away, but he continued standing there, staring right at me. Then he tried the handle of the door without success. I continued screaming at him, honking my horn and waiting for the red light to change. The man straightened, stepped away from the passenger side door, and moved quickly to my driver's side door, trying the handle again but without success. He stood with a wide stance next to my car, as though he was lunging. At the moment I thought to myself, screw it, and slammed the gas to run the red light. The man kind of stumbled when I did this, and I think I ran over his foot in my escape. When I arrived home, I woke up my husband to tell him and call the police. The police never found the man, as by the time they sent someone, he was gone. The police officer did commend me for running the red light, as well as for potentially running over the man's foot. So, to the creepy man who tried to get in my car in the middle of the night, let's not meet. It finally started raining here, so I took my son, 14-year-old male, out mushroom hunting over the weekend. It was later than we normally go, and the sun goes down much earlier, but we were taking a quick trail to the river and back in hopes of finding turkey tails or chanterelles. We took a wrong turn and ended up going through a big field, which the trail would take us back around to the main trail to the river. As we walked towards the main trail, the last group of people had left, and it was just me and my son. We walked along, and out of the thicket side trail came this weird man. He had a dog with him that was alert at his side. He was staring at us as we walked closer to him. Then he started waving at us. This really weird, slow wave. I was immediately uncomfortable and goosebumpy, but didn't want to be impolite. So, I half-heartedly waved back while staring back and telling my son to slow up a little. I didn't want to actually meet up at the junction. After a full minute of us dawdling, the guy slowly turned and began walking down the trail towards the main trail. I was warily walking, didn't want to go too fast, and we stopped to look at some plants. So the guy and dog got further down this trail, which curved to the right, and continued on 2 blocks to the junction. I was thinking, if this was a creepy Let's Not Meet, this dude will be waiting around the corner. And, sure enough, he was standing at the junction, off to the left and towards the parking lot, and to the right was a .6 trail to the river. Dude was just standing there with his dog staring at us, not moving at all. Both my son and I were like, holy cow, what's going on? Let's keep wide to the right, and saying he looks old, we could probably outrun him, and just generally planning for freaky deaky stuff just in case. He kept staring at us, so we approached. I asked if he was okay and kept staring back. He was greasy-haired, tiny round glasses, a blue windbreaker, plaid long shorts, about 50 years old. His dog was a small beagle mix. He didn't answer me at all, just kept staring. We turned to the right and walked about a block. I had my phone cam facing me so I could watch him over my shoulder, and the only movement was him slowly shifting his direction to continue staring at us. I didn't say anything else to him. It was moderately unsettling, his stare, made more so by the lack of response, a motionless face, weird tiny glasses, slow wave at us, like a zombie. He did leave because on our way back he was no longer standing on the main trail. So, hey, freaky deaky forest zombie dude, for sure stay in the thickets, and let's not meet. I am a 22-year-old female, and last night my husband, who is a 25-year-old male, woke me up at around 11:50 to tell me that someone has been knocking on our door and ringing our apartment doorbell for about 10 minutes on and off. He woke me so I could possibly ID the person. Once I looked out our upstairs apartment window, I saw the man walking to his car in our apartment parking lot, across the street from our unit. He was wearing blue jeans and a gray t-shirt. He was a medium build, possibly 30-year-old blonde man. He wasn't covering his face or anything, but the thing is, he was carrying what looked like resistance bands or ropes. He sat in his car for about 3 minutes while I was on the phone with dispatch. Then he came back to our door and knocked hard for another few minutes. Dispatch advised me that police were on their way, and they hung up. I started videoing the vehicle. I read out the tag number, make and model, and just watched as he put his car in park and reverse over and over again. Out of seemingly nowhere, he backed out of the parking lot and started rushing away, but not before the officer arrived and pulled him over. My downstairs neighbor knocked on my door and told me that he had been peering into their little children's windows and was pounding on their door as well. She said that her husband had left only 1 minute before he started knocking at her door. She said he saw her children through the window, and that's why he continued knocking. Our doors are right next to one another, so he probably didn't know what door he had wanted opened. He was watching us as well through our upstairs windows, so I turned all the lights out and shut the blinds while I called dispatch. The police never contacted us for a statement. I've reached out to dispatch about an update, and I'm waiting to see if any action was taken. We're keeping our eyes peeled to see if he's been following us. I'm replacing my porch light bulbs with motion detectors and putting bars in our window and door tracks. My neighbor and our families are panicked, to say the least. He was outside for about 25 to 30 minutes. To the knocking man with bad intentions, let's not meet. Update. I am trained in firearm usage and now live in a state where I can open carry and the background check is really quick. We're going this weekend to get a firearm. My husband will be taking some classes as he came from somewhere where owning a gun is illegal, so he's never handed one. I'm still waiting on a call from the responding officer. I have his badge number and name, so if they don't reach out to me today or tonight, he might be working third shift. I will call the substation. If they don't do anything, I will go ahead and make a suspicious persons case for the paper trail. We had no odd encounters last night. However, while I was looking at the video I took, I remember the car. I was walking my dog at 8 p.m. a week ago for him to pee, and this car was driving really slowly through my neighborhood parking lot and parked a few spots down from where I was letting my dog sniff. They just sat there with the car running. When I tell you my ears started ringing and I got an awful feeling, I'm not joking. I turned around and went home. Didn't give my dog much of a chance to pee, and shut every door and window. I think this man has been stalking out our apartment building, me and my neighbors. I think he wanted to get in where those children are. I'll update more when I have more information. Update 2. It's been a week since the incident. I called dispatch today because I never received a follow-up from the responding officer. A sergeant from the PT called me back to give me more information. He said that they pulled over the man, ran him to make sure that there were no warrants, and asked him what he was doing. He told the officer that he was meeting up with an acquaintance. The officer let him go with no further questions. Not only that, the responding officer is also a sergeant. I about lost my mind. The sergeant I spoke to today stated that he should have looked into it more. It was obviously an attempt at burglary, sexually motivated and or with intent to commit a felony. The responding officer is supposed to call me tonight when he gets on duty. I'm livid, honestly. Zero due diligence for this case. But there's not even a case. No case number. Just a documented police contact. I'll give more info when I have it. Final update. The officer finally called me. Here's how the conversation went. Hello? I answered groggily, as well as it was past midnight. Hello, miss. I was told you have some questions about an incident a few nights ago? Yes, about Thursday. I wanted to know what that man told you he was doing. You know he was looking in windows and carrying potential restraints. I'm not sure if that was relayed to you. I stopped him, ran his tags, and he told me that he was meeting up with a guy from a dating app. He seemed forthcoming and open with his motive for being there. Meeting up with... Wait. He was meeting up with someone by looking in windows, knocking on 2 different doors for 20 minutes? I was shocked and still not fully awake. Like I said, he seemed forthcoming and honest with me. When he said that, the first thing that popped to my mind was so was Jeffrey Dahmer. With resistance bands? Like workout bands? He had a lot of belongings in his car, so he probably just had them in there. Right, but bringing them to a hookup, knocking on multiple doors, he saw the little girls through the window. He waited until my neighbor's husband left until knocking. That's on tape, officer. I checked in with the apartment manager after the incident. Well, I'm familiar with this individual, and I've been doing drive-thrus of your complex to make sure he doesn't come back. I haven't seen anything. If you don't have any more questions, I'll let you go, ma'am. Doesn't make sense to me, but thank you, goodbye. And I hung up. I don't have much to say. I just feel so icky about that conversation. Nothing new has come of the situation. I haven't seen the man or the car. My mind is blown at the lack of follow-up or due diligence. I live in a suburb. It's not a busy one either. The PD has a small jurisdiction. I guess I'll just have to protect myself. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door. This confused me as no one ever used that door. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all of the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little inconvenient to access as you'd have to go around the building and up the narrow stairs, as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. It didn't even make sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. As I approached the back door, I saw two tall men in the window, standing at the door. A chill went down my spine. I did not feel safe opening the door, so I called out, "Hello?" One of the men tapped on the window. "Yes, hello. May we come in? We're with Bresnan." At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but did not have any issues with it. I replied, "We're not having any issues with Bresnan. Is there a problem?" "Ma'am," the man said, "can we come in? We're servicing the area and it's important we look at your cable." I shook my head. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, "so there's no need to stop by." "Ma'am, we are visiting every resident. Let us in so we can do our job." I noticed the man grab the doorknob and try to open the locked door. I slowly grabbed the knife from our knife block and held it at my chest. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, trying not to convey the shakiness of my voice. "So you don't need to be here." The two figures appeared to shuffle and then straighten. "Ma'am, let us in. We're on a deadline and need to do our job." I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive from work. I gripped the knife tighter. "Ma'am? Ma'am?" I saw him try the doorknob again. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude of always locking my doors. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry I can't help you. Can I please get your names and badge numbers? I can give your supervisor a call to let them know our cable is fine." I heard another shuffle and one man replied, "No need to, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time." With that, both of the men exited the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone. With the knife still grasped to my chest and the phone falling out of my other hand, I sank to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying again after he got home. He immediately called the Bresnan Cable Company and spoke to a representative, who informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had a visit from the company. No one had. So, to the two creepy men who tried to break into my home under the guise of cable repair, let's not meet. When I was like 6 years old, I attended the elementary school which was located in our small town. My way to and from school was basically just 500 meters of main road before turning into the street where I lived. At the time, we're talking about the late 90s here, all of the parents in town were extremely adamant on telling their kids not to trust or follow strangers. Never get into anyone's car, even if they say they know your parents and your friends. The reason why? There was a murder like 3 years back in the same town. A girl, not even 6 years old, was found dead and SA'd in a field. The strange thing about it is nobody knows how exactly she was taken. No signs of forced entry or anything, which implies somebody lured her somewhere without her suspecting a thing. The case still hasn't been solved more than 20 years later. So our parents were very afraid that their kid was going to be next, because kids can be really stupid, and you can't watch them 24/7. Now, on to what almost happened to me. I was walking home from elementary school. About halfway home, at the shadiest and mostly covered by trees and bushes area, a car pulled up next to me. A blonde, about 30-year-old woman was the driver. She told me she could drive me home. She claimed to be going in that direction anyway, which was unclear to me at the time. Essentially BS, because once the road ends near my house, there's nothing but empty fields. Kid-like as I was not suspicious, and I was like, oh, it's not too far, I can walk. Then she started being more insistent. The whole, oh, come on, it's fine, nothing to worry about, and you can relax instead of walking thing. The alarm bells only started ringing when she said she knew my mother. They're friends, and supposedly, she was asked by her to drive me home. Thank God for my parents repeatedly talking about the tricks that people use to lure you in. I started being creeped out. Continued to walk, but she kept driving beside me. Now, the real weird part in hindsight was her next attempt to get me into the car. She started saying that I was obviously afraid, and cool children are not afraid of such things. If you want to be cool, you should just relax. Honestly, I did not fully realize the full extent of this situation. I just felt uncomfortable and wanted to get out of the conversation, so I started sprinting the rest of the way back to my house. Once I got home, I stayed right next to the door and kept looking out the window for a few minutes. And guess who drove by and basically checked out the house? That creepy woman. The road was a dead-end road, and only after 3 more minutes the car came back the same way. It took years until I realized what kind of bullet that I dodged there. All I was thinking was, my parents told me not to do this. I didn't know why or what that woman wanted. The drill of hearing over and over again not to believe strangers or get into the car kicked in. When I was older and started getting into true crime, I remembered this whole thing for the first time in 2 decades. Then I realized, holy crap. This woman was most likely sent as the trustworthy front woman to lure kids into their car and take off. Could be she was doing this for some crazed pedo or some human traffickers. Moral of the story is, even if your kids are too stupid/young, like I was, to comprehend such things, the rules of not following strangers and the fact that strangers will lie to you for your evil intentions must be drilled into your child's head, like watching both ways before crossing the road. I read a post earlier tonight that reminded me of this not-so-fun moment that happened last year. At the time, I, 24-year-old female, had the entire lower main floor unit I lived in to myself. I used to bartend/manage a nightclub a few blocks away, and would usually get home around 4 a.m. This night, I had just finished a 12-hour shift, was exhausted and hungry, so I decided to order some food. I placed the order, get my joint rolled and ready for when the food arrives, put on a movie and wait. Eventually I hear the doorbell ring, and being alone and it being late at night, I waited to get the photo sent to the delivery app to verify my food was at the door, and so I didn't have to make small talk with the driver, as post-COVID I still kept the option for contactless delivery. 3 to 5 minutes pass. I see the photo of my food on the doorstep and decide to get up and go get it. My bedroom window had 5 large windows that gave my full view of the path along the house, the main street in front, our garbage area, and the area right in front of our unit's door. The driver is still out there, and now he's texting me to come out and get my food. I tell him he left it in a perfect spot. I'll be out shortly to get it, and thanks for delivering it. At this point, I'm waiting for him to go, because even though marijuana is legal here, people can still be judgmental, and I don't want to go out in my PJs to collect my food, smoke, and see a human after working all night. He doesn't leave. He keeps texting me to come outside, and now I can hear him talking to another male voice, although my window view obscures anyone else that might be out there. The food in the photo was right against my door, and I can see him edging it away and off to the side, so I'd have to fully step out and around a small corner to collect it. I keep texting him, telling him it's in a perfect spot. I'm glad he followed the instructions. I'll be out shortly. He starts banging on my front door, still occasionally talking to this other male voice. My food is now further away from the door. He won't stop banging and telling me to come outside. Eventually, I tell him I set delivery as no contact as I have COVID, which was a lie, and don't want to get anyone sick. After I saw he'd read my message on the app, he put my food back by the front door and walked out of there, through the back parking lot. Initially, he'd come in through the front of the house. Something about this entire encounter felt so off. I waited about 15 minutes until I couldn't see anyone or hear anyone, quickly opened the door and grabbed my food. The whole ordeal lasted about an hour. My food was nice and cold. The joint was put away for another day, and my heart was racing for the rest of the night. So, delivery man who would not take the hint and go away back to his friend, let's not meet. This just happened today, and it's going to be quite long. Maybe when you read it, it'll seem like nothing, and it has a good ending, but I've never been so scared in my life, and I need to share it. I'm a social work student doing an internship at a mental institution. It's not like other hospitals. It's organized like a village with care houses for people who have different pathologies and did different things, ranging from murdering people, serial assault, to people who have deficiencies and are considered harmless. There are closed and open units. It's in a remote town outside of the city I live in, and there are woods everywhere in the village. This patient in question is considered harmless, even though he SA'd a nurse and another patient a few years back, and he has deviant tendencies. Thing is, he's in an open unit, and free of his movements and can go out whenever he wants. Today, he came multiple times by the unit I was working in, because he wanted a football magazine we didn't have, and we had to lock ourselves in because he was screaming and was hitting against the door. At one point, he got yelled at by a colleague and started crying like a baby and ran away. It honestly made me feel so sad for him. He's in his late 20s, but he acts and talks like a child, and has been here since his teenage years. My coworkers warned me and told me what to answer if I ever got face to face with him, in order to not make him aggressive. So, ended work a little bit late this evening, and it was already night out. It was only me and my tutor left in the unit, and I had to leave by myself because she wanted to work a bit longer. So I go out, take the usual route, the shortest way out, going through a small wooded area. There is absolutely no one out. I walk for a few minutes and suddenly I hear someone running full speed behind me. I turn around and it's him. My heart stopped for a second. He then stops and gets very close to me, starts asking me questions. If I have a boyfriend, if I'm Algerian, if I like football, what team do I support, and several times if I find him handsome. I respond positively to all of his questions like I was told to do, but I see he's not satisfied and is getting irritated, and he's getting even closer, blocking my way. At that point, I think that's it. I'm alone at night here with this guy who's already assaulted people, and now it's going to be my turn, if not worse. I was told to always go his way, so at that point, I think my only option is to make him calmer, by talking about something he likes. So I start talking football with him for a good few minutes. I start to see him in a better mood, and I think now is my chance. I tell him I really need to go, which he doesn't seem to agree with at first, but finally I manage to get away. I walk as fast as I can to exit out of the hospital. At one point I look back to see he's not there anymore, and I felt so relieved. At the end, I don't know what his intentions were, if I managed to get out from something really bad or if he just wanted someone to talk to. But he really scared me anyways. Thank you to anyone who read that. Thank you. This happened a few years ago. I'm a 28-year-old female, and I was on my way to the BMV before work. For some context, we have two major streets, Lane Avenue and Park Avenue, in our city, with many residential streets that intersected both avenues. I was headed south from Lane to Park Avenue. My destination was on Park. On one of the intersecting streets, when a woman, about 22 years old, ran out in front of my truck. My truck was an old Ford that did not have automatic locks. I had barely stopped when she hopped into my truck, not even asking through my window for a ride or help. She got in and I told her to get out. She said she was diabetic and it was her birthday, and begged me to go back the opposite direction to her home. I told her no, I had to go to work. She said her boyfriend beat her up. She had not a single scratch or bruise, but I asked if she needed an ambulance anyways. It was 90 degrees outside, and she claimed to be having a diabetic episode, and she begged me not to call. After a few minutes of her arguing, begging, and pleading with me, and me saying no, I finally and forcefully told her that I wasn't moving until she got the F out of my truck. At this point, she opened the door and jumped out. I started to drive away as soon as her feet hit the ground. She slammed the door shut and yelled through my window, "Oh yeah? Well, I've just been stabbed." And when I looked in the rear view, she was waiting in the road for the next car. I called 911 and told them what had happened and where she was. I knew if she was truly diabetic in the 90+ degree weather, without food or water, she could become delusional very quickly. But every instinct in my body tells me she had more sinister intentions, especially living on one of the human trafficking hubs of the country. I don't know what fate I could have met had I taken her to wherever her supposed destination was. Girl that hopped in my truck, let's never meet again. I am 33 now, so this was a long time ago. I only remember parts of it, but my mom said it was the most terrified she had ever been in her entire life. Rightfully so. As a kid, I had a problem with wandering off. I still do this as an adult, and it's usually caused by something grabbing my attention, and I just disappear from a group sometimes. It's a joke now, but when I was a kid, it was incredibly dangerous. I would find out 15 years later that this was my undiagnosed ADHD kicking in. My family went to a park one afternoon. It was a beautiful day, and my mom and dad had a picnic on the grass and were drinking some wine. My siblings and I were off in the field playing. At some point, I saw an old man sitting on a bench. He wasn't looking at us or bothering us, but my ADHD brain decided to go say hello for some reason. In addition to wandering off, I also had a knack for talking to strangers. I'm surprised I'm still alive, to be honest. I remember this old man seemed nice and showed me a magic trick, the old coin behind the ear thing. I thought it was cool, and he showed me a couple more tricks. This is where my memory blanks until my mom ended up finding me. At some point, my mom noticed I was missing. She knew I had an issue for wandering off, but the fact I couldn't be seen in an open park was alarming. She searched for about 5 minutes and could not find me. Eventually, she did find me, with this old man, standing in between two cars in the parking lot. I don't remember how I got there, or why I went there, but I do remember my mom swooping me away from the man and freaking the hell out. My dad ended up punching the guy, I think, From what my mom said, no foul play was apparent when she found me. He just looked like a quiet old man in his 60s. But the fact that I was in between two cars probably meant that I was seconds away from getting abducted if my mom didn't find me in time. So yeah, don't let your overly friendly ADHD kids talk to strangers. Bonus. One other time, 2 years later, I wandered off in Disney World. I was just playing in Goofy's house, but apparently I was missing for like 30 minutes. Nothing bad happened, and I had no idea what I was doing was wrong. But my parents and my grandparents basically had a heart attack searching for me. Clearly, I am the sole reason that they all have gray hair now. I grew up out in the wooded country in Illinois, on a short dead-end street 10 plus miles from a town, and there were 7 houses in the area spread out on 2.5 acres of wooded lots. There were no large wild animals. There aren't bears or similarly large animals in the region, and people didn't meander there or show up lost. Usually, lost folks or large animals wandering around never happened in the 20 years I lived there, so please keep that in mind. When I was a young girl in my early teens, I had a good guy friend a few years older than me who lived next door, Terry. Terry was allowed to go out with his friends much later than I was, and he would sometimes tromp over to my yard after getting home late and throw rocks from the gravel area outside my window to chat. The bed was right next to the window. I'd open the window and we'd whisper stories and generally talk for a bit. My second-story window faced our backyard, and his house was to the side. I could see his house from my window over the shrub trees and the walking path to his driveway. I'd often know if he was out. The light was on over the side door entrance, or already home. Light was off. One time during the summer when my window was open, I heard a car in his driveway dropping him off. I was probably 14 years old and it was around midnight. I heard Terry get out of a car and he was talking to his friends. Soon his friends pulled away. I softly called out as loud as I could without waking my parents, asking Terry to stop by and chat. He didn't respond as he probably didn't hear me. Then I came up with the not-so-brilliant idea to sneak outside and scare him. I'd spent many years in the woods and learning how to blend in and be silent. As kids, we'd often sneak around and scare each other. So, I silently sneaked down from the second floor and out my back garage door, which led to our backyard, below my window, which led to Terry's house off the side through our gravel area, then through a well-worn path through the woods about 25 feet long. My parents had put in a gravel pit around the back of the house, probably because nothing much grew due to the shade of the oak trees. There were 14-inch oaks set out as an uneven stepping path on the gravel, and if you stepped off the rounds, the crunch of the gravel rocks would give you away. I picked my way expertly and silently across the log rounds facing Terry's house. My eyes got accustomed to the dark and I didn't see him. Also, at that time I heard the door of his house close and the light going off signaling he went in, likely to bed. I waited a bit as I thought I saw something move in the woods between our houses, but not on the path we'd always use. If you didn't use the path, there were wild rose and raspberry plants that had thorns and were painful to walk through if you weren't careful. So I thought it was odd that he'd be in the woods, but maybe he wanted to scare me like I was plotting to do to him. But I saw something human-sized and dark moving through the woods, slow, and pausing every once in a while like me. It was coming closer, and I definitely saw it, but it was strange that it wasn't walking directly to my window to talk. Therefore, I hunched down and waited in silence, wondering if I could still startle him. I still thought it was Terry, and he saw me sneak out, and he was trying to scare me. I watched a dark outline of a human figure moving, but then I would lose sight of it in the foliage. It seemed to be stalking slowly, and listening/checking every few feet while hiding. So I whispered after losing patience one last time for Terry, but he didn't answer. I got bored of hiding and crouching, so I quietly tippy-toed back to my garage door and went back inside, silently locking up as I went. I snuck back upstairs to my room above the area where I was just standing/crouching. My window was open and I definitely heard someone/something walking around the yard. I whispered again for Terry out my window but got no answer. Then I heard someone/something fall and grunt/moan pretty loudly in the window well right below my window. It wasn't enough to wake my parents, but definitely loud enough I didn't mistake it, and it sent a shock of fear through me. If you aren't familiar with a window well, it's a semicircle hole connected to the house dug out about 3 or 4 feet deep and reinforced with metal. It allows a basement window to be put in below ground level, and the hole lets some natural light in. There is no way Terry would have fallen into our window well. We had been playing hide and seek and many outdoor games for years since we were young around the whole neighborhood. We knew everyone's window wells and house footprints, plus paths in the woods, like the back of our hands. The grunt sounded humanish and not like an animal. It also pulled itself out quietly without a lot of thrashing. That's when I realized this wasn't a fun game, and someone/something was out there, and it wasn't Terry. I tried to look outside my window as best as I could, but there was a screen on my windows to keep the bugs out, so I couldn't lean my head out the window to see next to the wall of our house directly below me. I then heard the crunch of rocks, as whatever it was stepping away in the noisy gravel. Again, Terry would know where the log rounds were and would not step in the gravel. He knew my parents were pretty strict, and he was as good at being quiet as I was. Whatever it was, stopped, and I held my breath. I pretty much sat there with my face pressed against the screen 2 stories up for probably half an hour. It seemed like an hour, but I'm sure I didn't have the patience back then to wait that long. I never heard it/him/her leave, but I grew tired and eventually fell asleep on my bed that was next to my window. There are a few things that I am certain of. 1, it wasn't Terry. I asked him later and he said he went to bed that night when he got home. He also would have no reason to lie. 2, I'm pretty sure it wasn't one of our neighbors, and I can't think of any reason a person would be there. We had a few neighbors and only 2 other houses out of 7 had kids. Again, these 7 houses were spread out in 2.5 acres per home. 3, there weren't any big animals in the area. As wooded as the whole area was, we only had some deer, but they were hunted and didn't come close to homes. Plus, our dogs scared them away. So, stranger in the woods, let's not ever meet. Content warning for misogynistic language, threats of violence, and minor actual violence. Shoving. Stay safe out there, everybody. Before I skipped a year, I was in a class with a guy named Charlie in year 2 and 3. I never particularly liked him. He spoke too loudly and boasted constantly. On top of that, he made fun of me from my social anxiety, my slight accent and nationality. He threw things at me occasionally, and teachers never believed me since I was shy and an imaginative young girl. When I skipped a year and moved to a different campus of the same private school, I was sure that I wouldn't see him again. I didn't. Not until last year. I was in year 10, and I am now in year 11. I do well in all classes except for art. Made a few close friends who I trust, and even joined a couple of clubs. 7-year-old me would be proud. But the terror started at the beginning of the last school year. My friend Ray was walking me to Spanish class, and behind me I hear a boy calling my name. I turned around, and surely enough, it's Charlie. He made a few jokes about me being a nerd to his friends, and Ray promptly took me around the outside of the main building to the other building where I have Spanish. He asked me about it, and I brushed it off, saying that it was just some guy who probably knew me from the other campus. Every Monday, I have MUN during lunch, and one day I was helping Patrick, the club leader, clean up and rearrange the classroom. He asked me to grab an eraser from the teacher's cupboard, and I quickly head a floor down. As I'm coming back up, I see Charlie jogging up behind me, tripping me and pushing me right into the metal railing. I wasn't severely hurt, but my foot was recovering from being fractured, so it wasn't ideal. I found him roaming the hallway with his friends, so I called out for him. He turned around and I asked if I could just quickly say one thing to him. I began politely asking him to be careful when on the stairs, to which he rolled his eyes, but I continued to explain why he should not push me again, since my foot was healing and that overall he could hurt someone. His face morphed from annoyance to a crooked smile. Him and his friends broke out in a fit of laughter. I ignored them and began to walk towards the classroom where MUN is hosted, as him and his friends started chanting the C word over and over again. His behavior only worsened from then on. I quickly got up from my chair, leaving my laptop open when I was in the library, and he swiftly started browsing my tabs and apps, some of which were of private messages to friends and family. I returned, standing by the seat in horror, and snatched the laptop from his hands. On another occasion, he stole my sports uniform and broke my umbrella. What was worse was when he somehow got my number, and over a series of voicemails, he began detailing all the grotesque things he would do to me if I was ever alone. They started off as pretty average, beating me until I was bruised or ripping out my hair, but began to transgress into sexual violence. He said he wished he could choke me and arm me, only to leave me lying on his bed, bloodied and terrified. This was followed by remarks about how much I was asking for it through the clothes I wore, how women are stupid and deserve to be treated as such, and that no one would want me after him. I haven't had any reactions with him this school year, but I remain wary. If anything escalates, I will tell my friends and family more details. But for now, at least I feel safer than I did before. Last year, I was on vacation in Southern Europe with a large group of friends. We had been there for a while and always took an Uber from our rented house to the city, which had very nice bars and clubs. The thing with Uber is it allows very cheap and flexible transport, but it also opened up the door to a lot of creeps. I've had Uber drivers who are super cool, but also extremely drugged up road ragers who drive like maniacs and think they're impressive. And it's always the worst once an attractive woman sits in the car. It feels like a lot of total creeps think, now that I have her here in this situation where she can't flee, she is forced to be nice and talk to me. For that very reason, the guys of our group always use their phone to call Uber, so no creep picks the ride specifically because a female name popped up. Some of my friends even use male fake names because of that. But the guy that we had that day was by far the worst. It was late evening. An Uber picks us up and drives me, 27 male, another 27-year-old male, a 25-year-old female, and a 24-year-old female to the desired old town where we planned to do clubbing and drinking. While driving, the Uber constantly looks at the two women in the back seat via the mirror. They only told me this afterwards. He kept starting conversations, but basically only addressed the girls who left answering to the guys, who gave short, non-detailed answers, basically signaling that 1, we don't want to talk, and 2, we don't think he needs to know our plans. To us, he seemed way too pushy, and he wasn't really that big on hygiene, giving off the classic, this is exactly the scenario why we don't like booking Ubers vibe. Meanwhile, we can't wait to arrive at our destination and get out of this uncomfortable but not super horrible situation. But that did not feel this great when this guy didn't stop on the road, but instead pulled into a parking spot. He started fumbling with his phone and we're like, all right, weird, but let's get out, and left the car. To our surprise, the guy then turned the car off and got out as well. We saw that red flag and just started walking away towards the bar area of town without saying a word. Cars can't enter the old town. After 400 feet, once we reached the gates, we stopped because this was the meeting spot for the other half of our group, who took a separate Uber, and found out that this guy was following us and stopped as well. You know the classic circle people form while talking, where one guy is just kind of standing next to it because people don't let him in? Yeah, we did that. We started making conversation about how long the others will take to get there, where they are right now, etc. And this guy keeps throwing in comments like he's part of the posse. Oh cool, even more people. This must be a great evening. Broken English, but not that bad. Then we texted our friends in group chat that we're changing the meeting place to this bar because the Uber driver is following us around and we want to lose him. So one of us start leading the group at a quick pace through the streets. There are very small, lots of people, high old town buildings all around them. We make turns at every corner trying to lose the guy, but he follows. Finally, we reached a big plaza where there were hundreds of people closely together, basically queuing to enter the narrow street up ahead. We pushed through like rude douchebags and successfully lost the guy. Finally, we could head straight to the bar after our detour and link up with our other part of the group. 2 hours pass. Life is all good. We decide to head to another bar a bit further away because the drink prices kind of sucked in this one. We had 2 drinks in that bar, and guess who walks through the door and stands next to the table? Yeah, our Uber driver. Hey guys. At this point, a friend, 28 male, who is good at communicating and frankly quite big, tells the guy that we want to keep to ourselves, and we have no interest in hanging out with him. Please leave us alone. Fortunately, the guy says it's no problem and leaves. Unfortunately, around 3 a.m., while dancing in the crowd at the club, the same guy announced his presence by tenderly pressing his body against the back of one of the girls, 24 female, who he has been staring at through the mirror in the car. The girl's boyfriend, 27 male, recognizes the guy and gets super angry, grabs him by the collar and essentially tells him that if he keeps following us, he's going to get the crap kicked out of him. A bouncer sees this and approaches them. I start talking to the bouncer, who was super annoyed by anyone intervening at first, but after hearing how this guy stalked us from his car to the club, he just asks the Uber guy a few questions, then proceeds to throw him out. We stayed a bit longer than we wanted in hopes of him not waiting for us. After that, we reported the guy for being a creep in the app and called another Uber, which thankfully wasn't him. Thrifting is my favorite hobby, if you can call it that. It's something I like to do alone when I get the time. It's a chance for my brain to shut off and just let go as I scan aisles, crammed with random things for hours. Note, I'm 5'5.5", former elementary teacher. I'm about as intimidating as a wet sock, and I'm pretty quiet and stay to myself in public. I had decided to go out of my way to a store I hadn't been to before, and followed my usual routine. When I'm in a store, it's just me and the items. I don't pay any mind to anyone else around me, as the stores are crowded and I'm really only there to do my own thing. So imagine my surprise when an older woman turned to me and said in a huff, "Can I help you?" I turned and looked around me to make sure that I was who she was talking to. I just shook my head no, making a confused expression, and went back to looking at shoes. Things were okay for a minute before I heard her in the next aisle talking to her friend. Oh my God, this creepy woman is following me. Every time I look up, she's there. There was only so much space in the store. I usually go along the edges and then make my way to the center of the store, so there's a good chance she probably just saw me doing my thing. I tried to avoid her until I realized she started talking to random people about me, about how creepy I was, and how I was stalking her. People started giving me funny looks, but paid no mind once they realized how harmless and shrimpy I look. Her? Really? Someone said. Yeah, I'm gonna mess her up if I see her again. She began making more and more aggressive comments, and I decided that I had had enough. I've never fought anyone in my life, and I wasn't planning to that day. I left my items and went to my car. Yeah, something was up with her, and I wasn't sticking around to find out what it was. to the actually creepy lady in the thrift store, let's not meet again. Last year, I was going out for drinks with my friends, but since I had to go to uni the next day, I only stayed till around midnight. My boyfriend promised to pick me up and go home with me, because I don't like to take the subway home at night, but since I was pretty drunk by then, I took a little too long walking out of the pub. Unfortunately, we had to wait for the night bus, with multiple stops, since the subway closes on weekdays at night. For context, my boyfriend and I don't live together, but very close to each other, around 15 to 20 minutes walking distance. Both areas are pretty crappy. He lives near a train station, a lot of crackheads, homeless and sketchy people around, and I live in a cheap, bad district with a high crime rate. My building has 2 entrances on 2 different streets, because it is a corner building site leading to a patio, and then to the apartment building and its doors. To get into my apartment, I have to open 3 doors. I usually use the entrance door that is nearer to the subway and on the side of my apartment. We had to take 2 buses to go home. One drove us to the train station and the next one from the train station to my apartment. After getting out of the first bus, we realized that we would have to wait for around 20 minutes or something for the second bus to come. And since I really had to sleep at home, class the next day, I didn't want to stay at his place. My boyfriend didn't want to wait, so he persuaded me to walk instead of taking the bus, which sober me would have never done. But since I was still drunk, I didn't care how we got home, so I agreed. So, we started walking home, and passed by a few sketchy people, mostly people selling drugs, etc., but nothing really that bad. Then, I saw a guy walking in our direction, and I somehow got a bad feeling, so I told my boyfriend that I wanted to change to the other side of the street, because I don't want to walk past him. Suddenly, the guy yelled, "Hey," as if he wanted to ask us something, but we ignored it and continued to walk. He got louder and louder until he started to yell. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was coming over, so I whispered, "Run," to my boyfriend, took his hand and ran the fastest I could while he was chasing us. We ran, and then made a turn to the right, the street where I live, and we hid. It seemed like he was gone. So I took my keys out and we started running towards my building, taking the other entrance of my building that I normally didn't use. As I was trying to open the door, my boyfriend started panicking, throwing me inside the patio and closing the door aggressively, and then pushing me to the building. He explained that the guy came running from the other side of the street, meaning he took a shortcut, probably thinking we were going to run to the subway/bus stops. If we had taken the other entrance, he would have been clearly the faster one. Being in shock, we unfortunately didn't call the police, which I regret. I stopped going out for drinks/clubbing for a half a year after this, and slept at my boyfriend's place for 2 weeks, because I was scared that he would come back. I think the worst thing about this is that he really wanted to get us for whatever reason. I still want to know why he chased us for so long. 2 weeks later, a girl a few streets away was AR'd in front of her building by a guy who chased her home. I wonder if it was the same guy, or maybe it was just a coincidence. Either way, dude, let's not meet. This happened when I was 12 or 13. Back then, late 80s, there was a curfew for anyone underage. I don't know if that still exists, but it matters for the story. Me, female, and my best friend, female, would walk the neighborhood at night. She would spend the night a lot at my house, and me at hers, vice versa, most weekends. We would crawl through my bedroom window and walk around and visit our middle school friends or just go to the park or whatever. We were well aware of the curfew and would run and hide from headlights, as we didn't want to get caught. One night, we were out doing our thing, see some headlights, and run under a carport. The car pulls into the driveway we're hiding in. Guy gets out and starts yelling, "You trying to rob me?" So we run. My friend runs one way, I run the other. I hear her scream. I look back and see she's caught. She has her hands up. I realize that I can't leave her there by herself, so I walk over, with my hands up, saying it's okay, we're just kids. Then I see the man has a gun. He's pointing the gun at her, and she is hyperventilating. I walk up trying to explain that we aren't trying to do anything crazy, just running from possible cops. He points the gun at me. He's saying something about us trying to rob him. I'm like, no dude, we were hiding from possible cops because of curfew. He made us pull our shirts up to show, supposedly that we had no weapons. But we were 13 years old, so thinking back, he might have just been a perv. He let us leave after that. This was 30 years ago. I wonder what would have happened if I just kept running. I also wonder what would have happened if I or my friend had told an adult about it. I mean, it was a few streets down from my house. He could have been identified. Or maybe we were, ultimately, the bad guys. So this only happened yesterday, and it's been driving me crazy. It's not as wild as other stories on here, but it's by far one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. So my husband and I are walking home from having a beer at the local pub around 6 p.m. In terms of setting the scene, we live in a small New Zealand town. Population around 2,000. That's a real mixed bag in terms of residents. You got older folk, meth heads, low income, but increasingly commuters from our capital city have been settling here. We fall into the latter category. It's spring here, so it's still plenty light, and we're just chatting as we walk the 10 minutes or so home. About 3 minutes into the walk, at the first intersection on our walk, I spot a cat sitting on the fence of one of the corner houses on the other side of the street from us. I say meow and it meows back. It then starts stalking a bird, so my husband and I continue watching this house. The cat really, as we walk past. Suddenly, a person with a brown paper bag mask on their head kind of stumbles out of the front door of this house into the yard. Their mannerisms and how they're moving are so strange, but not what I'd associate with being drunk. The house itself seems completely dead, so there's no party on or anything. The person then turns to us and makes eye contact. Well, the eye holes in the mask are staring at us. And they slowly start backing away to the front door alcove of the house and disappear from view into the alcove. We've been slowly walking this whole time, and at this point I have literal goosebumps and an intense sense of dread. When I write it down, it sounds so silly, but there was something so creepy about this person. We're still looking as we walk past the house, and the paper bag face slowly emerges from the alcove, watching us before disappearing from view again. As we walk and get further and further away, we keep turning around to look. And the same happens over and over again. Nothing. And then slowly but surely, the paper bag face emerges out to watch us. This continued until we were at the end of the street, some 350 meters, and rounded the corner out of sight. It still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. My husband laughed and said it was probably just some kid getting ready from Halloween or effing with us. And he's probably right. But I had to keep turning around to watch my back the rest of the walk home, because I was so creeped out. This happened when I was about 16 years old, so over 20 years ago. I have 5 younger siblings, and my little sister would have been 5 years old. We live in a bad neighborhood, in the housing projects. Our neighbor was nice, but she always had sketchy-looking people hanging around, especially men. One day, these two new guys started hanging out there every day. They'd always be outside smoking or just sitting on our porch. They made me really uncomfortable. They were always staring at me and would sometimes try to get me to walk over and talk to them. Or they'd come over into our yards when my parents weren't home and talk to me, asking me if I had a boyfriend and asking me if I wanted some beer or weed. I was a goody two-shoes Mormon girl, so I always said no thank you. I have to go inside now. They were probably both around 30 years old or so. Then they started coming over and asking to use our phone when my parents weren't home. My parents always let the neighbors use our phone, so I never said no, but I would just pass it through the door and make them stay on the porch. They'd sometimes ask to come in or try to talk to me, but I would tell them no because my parents weren't home. Now I realize how dumb that was because they could have just pushed the door open. But I was raised to ignore red flags and be polite and sweet at all times. Anyway, we had a little dog, and I always took him outside early in the morning on a leash. I was out one morning and one of the guys came inside and stood there staring at me for a few minutes and then went back in. I brought the dog inside, and just a few minutes later, there's a quiet knock on the door. I opened it, and both guys are there, and one says, "We just saw your baby sister out by the highway. You need to come get her." I panicked and ran outside with them. I started to run down our street towards the highway, and one of them says, "No, we'll drive you down there. We need to hurry." I seriously took 2 steps towards their truck before I realized what I was doing. I stopped and said that I needed to go back inside and tell my parents. And the man closest to me grabbed my arm and jerked me towards the truck, yelling, "We have to go now. She's gonna get hit by a car." I instantly felt sick and just yelled, "Let go of me." He dropped my arm and I ran back inside my house. I ran into my parents' bedroom to wake them up, and my little sister was sleeping in their bed with them. I woke up everyone because I was freaking out, and my dad ran outside and the guys in their truck were gone. I never saw them at the neighbor's house again. I wish I could say that my parents called the police or something, but they just kind of shrugged it off and made excuses like maybe they saw another kid that looked like your sister. Back when I was around 17 or 18, I would go out to parties with my friend at night. It was my best friend at the time, Ivan, and his cousin Caesar, that would invite me out that fateful night. I had been talking to a friend of Ivan on Facebook about meeting each other, and since I hadn't really had many experiences with girls, I thought it was now or never. This girl had a birthday party that day and invited us all to join her. So I took a bath, got ready, and my friends pulled up for me in a small car named Eidos that was really popular in Mexico in the early 2000s. Since it was small and it was really good at saving gas and not too expensive, so the perfect car for a college student. I said bye to my mom and got in. We went to buy beer for the night and a pack of smokes for everyone. Back then I would smoke a lot. I still cringe about it, but it was a college thing, I suppose. My friend told us that he had been in contact with this girl on Facebook and that she accepted to come to the party with him tonight. We were all impressed and happy for him. We pulled to her house and parked near a park to wait for her. I remember a group of thugs walking around the park, but since they seemed our age, we weren't too bummed out. My friend called her to come out, and my friend Caesar stepped out for a smoke. I was sitting in the back not wanting to come out because of these guys outside. They seemed to be asking for trouble because they began to argue about something really dumb with him. So my friend Ivan told me to step out just to have his back in case anything went down. I'm not particularly strong, but I am almost 6 feet tall, and with a winter coat, I tried my best to appear tough enough for them to think twice. I lit a cigarette and pretended to be a tough mofo, looked at a guy and laughed. Somehow it worked and they left. We went to the party and had a great time. I made out all night with the girl that I was talking to, and later even found out she had kissed pretty much every dude that was there before me. Nevertheless, I was still grateful for the opportunity and said goodbye with a long kiss. As we headed back to the house of my friend's date, she seemed very quiet. I knew they had hit it off during the party, but now looked stiff and even scared. My friend and I were riding in the back to let them have the front to themselves, but she was just nervously looking at her phone. When we arrived, she wanted to get out, and my friend, trying to score points, said, "Wait, I'll walk you in." She did not like this and said, "Just go." We were a bit buzzed in the back and wanted to have a smoke, so we all stepped outside and watched them go to her door. I remember laughing about something with my friend when the mood suddenly became so dark. She started screaming, "Go, now, get out of here." A car pulled out nearly in front of us, and people with bats and blunt instruments got off so fast I barely remember how I got back into my back seat. The girl said something along the lines of "leave them alone," and held him while a bunch of dudes got out. My friend Ivan got into the driver's seat of the car. Thankfully, it started right up without trouble, but a big bottle of liquor then hit the windshield, cracking the top corner. I saw some guys come from the right side of the car where we were standing, and quickly went to the other side to let my friend have easy way into the back right seat. As I turned the corner, I saw this massive-looking guy coming up to me, and barely had time to close the door and pull the lock down. Dude was punching my window. My other friend wasn't so lucky, since he actually got hit in the head, and had barely made it in the car. He couldn't even close the door because one guy was grabbing his leg. All of this happened in the span of like 6 seconds. I acted all out of instinct, and thankfully, we all got in and my friend stepped on the gas, while zigzagging in case they would shoot at us. We all were scared shitless, and wondered what had happened. As we got back to our neighborhood, my friends were fuming. Both of them knew their way around the fight, and could hold their own. I, on the other hand, am turning 30 next year, and still have never been in a fight. Thankfully, I still had some cash left, and told them that we should go buy some illegal beer at midnight, and tried my best to calm down and convince them not to go back. My friend Caesar had actually woken a dude up in the middle of the night with a phone call, and the man was ready to show up and throw down. After a few beers and a lot of talking, I convinced them that it wasn't worth it, and to just let the night end. I got home, my parents never found out, and just fell asleep. The next few days, my friend Ivan called me and told me that the girl's ex-boyfriend was actually a lead gang member, a gang known for beating the hell out of people and dropping them in water canals around the city. My heart dropped out of my chest. We had been seconds away from getting beat, drowned, and maybe killed by a bunch of thugs for a date. If it wasn't for a quick reaction, her backing them up a bit, and something outside this realm that wanted us to get away, we might not have made it. To this day, I still lay awake at night, thinking of how fast and out of nowhere situations like this can present themselves in your life. How many times have we avoided critical danger? All I can say is trust your gut and your instincts in the end. It all happens so fast. It's all you have. So this story happened almost 2 decades ago. I never had a place to tell it until this subreddit. Despite this makes up one of my core memories from childhood, because of how creepy it was when I was younger. It was around 2008. Me, my mom, my dad, and my brother were on a bus to go to a very popular and well-known mall when I was around the age of 4. At the time, we didn't have a car, so we had to take a few buses from where we lived to get to this mall. This one bus that we got on that led to this mall directly from one of the stops was super crowded. I mean, everyone was riding up on each other crowded. There wasn't much room for any of us to move, so my family and I had to stand. Sometime during the bus ride, when we were getting close to the mall, I ended up getting separated from my parents, forced behind roughly 2 or 3 people, and unsure of where my parents were. We were near the back, by the rear doors. I was standing just a foot or 2 away from the stairs which led to an elevated area of the bus, and beside me was this old dude who was sitting in the seat next to me. Something that my parents taught me when I was a kid was that whenever the bus is moving, You were to always hold onto the rails so you don't get knocked around or go flying off. Due to my position on the bus, there was only a singular rail that I could hold on to, the one right in front of this guy's seat. Because of what I was taught, I naturally held on to it so I wouldn't bump into people in front of me. This old guy, in response, grabs onto my hand firmly, holding my hand against the rail so I couldn't let go or get away. This man looked like your average grandpa and appeared to be likely in his 70s, definitely able to overpower me, who was basically just out of toddler range. The facial expression this man made is forever engraved into my mind. I cannot ever unsee it. Instead of this gentle smile like an old grandpa would make at a child, his chin was much more sinister, and he laughed at me in response to me trying to get my hand free once the bus had stopped and the doors were open. In fact, when the doors were open, he held onto my hand even tighter to stop me from leaving. Thankfully, I was able to wriggle my hand free because of the position in which his hand was at. I've never had a chance to tell anyone about this story. So Reddit, here you go. Old guy, let's not meet again. Last year, I was staying in a university hall for my final year. It's a private building, so not connected to the university. And out in the city near the main town, we have a car park, but nobody really uses it because we're poor students and it costs money to park there. So mine was one of only 2 or 3 cars at any given time. The car park isn't very well lit, and it's to the side of the building, so you have to walk for about 2 or 3 minutes to get into the main door. I was sitting in my car one evening after getting back from the gym, just scrolling on my phone because my seat was warm and it was dark and raining outside, so I couldn't be bothered to get up yet. I was reading an article when suddenly someone started knocking on my window, which was really odd. It was a man dressed in all black, and he started telling me how his friend had seen me through the window and thought I was really attractive, so could he have my number? I responded no, that's a bit odd and I don't feel comfortable with it. He continued to be insistent for a while, practically begging me to get out and give them my number or my social media details, telling me I should come over and speak to his friend, who was weirdly standing at the other side of the car park, furthest away from the building. I kept saying no and scrolling on my phone to show that I wasn't interested. He finally relented and walked away. I texted one of my friends to ask if he'd come and get me and walk me into the building. As I was waiting, the man returned, but now with his hood up, and he started banging loudly on my window, saying that I was being rude, ungrateful, and calling me all kinds of names. I kept staring at my phone and pretended I couldn't hear him. He then started trying the door handle. Thankfully, I'd locked my car after the first encounter, and then began violently pushing into my car when it didn't work. I still kept ignoring him, and texted for my friend to probably bring some other friends with him. My friend was taking a long time to read my message, and I was terrified, but for some reason didn't think to call the police. Probably because I was afraid of things escalating. The guy at my window had calmed down after a few minutes and walked off, saying that he'd leave me alone now. However, I watched him out of the corner of my eye join up with his friend, and then maybe 3 or 4 other men. They walked so that they were out of sight, but I could see their shadows lingering as they kind of circled around my car and moved towards the building but stayed in the dark. They lingered there for a while, until luckily another car came, which was obviously full of students going to a party due to the loud music and singing going on inside. This group of men left as they saw these people arrive, and I latched onto them and was able to walk with them as they entered the building. When I got home, my friend finally responded. He said that he'd actually heard about these guys before. Apparently they'd followed another girl into the building and into the lift a couple of days prior, then stood in the lift making really gross sexual comments to her. She'd had to run to her door and lock it, where they'd then stood outside knocking on the door and whispering for her to open it. We were able to report this to the building, who, to their credit, then hired a permanent set of security staff. We also got the CCTV footage of both incidents and were able to pass this on to police. So, weird men harassing young women at my university building? Let's not meet. This happened 7 years ago, but I still remember the fear I felt like it was yesterday. When I was in my early 20s, I worked the night shift at a bakery making the donuts. I loved that job. 3 nights of the week, I would be with my coworker, and 2 nights I would work alone. It was summertime, and we were having some problems with the AC, so the maintenance guy, Andy, came at night when I was on the clock to work on it. The bakery was small and crowded during the day, so it was best for him to come when it was empty. Management always let me know when Andy would be there, so it would never be a surprise. At first, he was very pleasant, and I had no issues sharing space with him as he worked. One evening, this changed. My coworker was a little late. She said she'd lost track of time in the shower, so Andy piped in saying, "We should all shower together to save time," and starts laughing. It was creepy as hell. He also had stated I lived alone, with his response being, "Good. I have you to myself then." After this night, I realized Andy wasn't the kind of guy that I thought he was. I stopped speaking to him unless I had to, and before long the AC was repaired and I thought I was free of him. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later. I'm working alone. It's 2 in the morning. I'm trying donuts when I hear all of a sudden a loud banging on the front window. Startled, I looked up and see who else but Andy. He's calling my name and asking to be let in. No one had said anything to me about him coming that night. Andy then starts pulling on the front door handles. Luckily, it's locked. I run into a corner of the bakery where he can't see me, and I try calling my manager with no response. The phone starts ringing and I can see the caller ID from where I'm sitting. It's Andy. He's being relentless and won't stop banging on the window and trying to pry the door open. My fear is rising. I dial 911. The cops arrive within 10 minutes and search Andy's vehicle. In the back seat, they find duct tape, a knife, and rope. They can't do anything, though, because he hasn't harmed me. Andy told the police he was there to fix the AC. My manager calls me back in the morning and tells me the AC is working fine, and they never asked Andy to come. So, whatever you had planned for me, Andy, I'm glad that I never found out. Let's never meet again. I don't live in the best area, but it's close to my kids' school and it's what we can afford. I was in line at a stoplight waiting for it to change so I could get to the school to pick up my older kids. I had my toddler with me. While I was waiting, I heard my passenger side handle move like someone was trying to open it. I always lock my car doors out of habit. My car is older, so they don't lock automatically when I start the car like the newer ones do. I look over, and there's an older woman aggressively trying to open my door. My window is cracked a bit for fresh air, but not all the way down. She reached up trying to get the window to go down, but couldn't get her fingers in. Woman, "Excuse me. I need you to help me out. I need a ride." Now, I'm all for helping people, but not when they're trying to get in my car with no explanation. You just don't do that. Me, "Do you need me to call 911? Woman, "No. You need to help me. Let me in. Come on now, help me out." Pulls on door again. Luckily for me, the light changed and I told her, "Sorry, but I have to go. I can't help you." I drove off and haven't seen her since. It's the only way to get my kids to school, so I have to drive through that way about every day. So, lady, let's not meet. I don't know how long he was in my bed or why he was there. All I know is that he woke me up with a kiss, which I promptly wiped off with my hand. I was fully clothed, which hinted to me nothing had happened, but the buttons of my pants were undone. I don't know if they were undone the whole time or if he undid them. Under the sheets, I could see that my shirt was pushed up, so he could put his hands on my waist and hold me close to him. I moved his hand off, and he went back to sleep. I sat up in shock and caught a glimpse of his face. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he yawned and said, "Resting." I brought out my hands and tightened them into fists. I was ready to defend myself, and at that moment he said, "Okay, I'll leave," and walked out of my room. I was so overcome with horror that I pushed my dresser up to the door to make sure he couldn't come back in. I immediately took a shower and was relieved that nothing worse had happened to me, to my knowledge. After all, I'd gone to bed at 11, and when I found him in my bed, it was 5 a.m. I had a weird dream that night too. In that dream, I lived in a zoo, and the zookeeper deliberately let every animal out of the cage so that they would roam free. One of those animals was a tiger, and when it saw me, it immediately started trying to eat me, so I fought back. I was wrestling it. Then I lost, and as the tiger had me pinned down, it started licking me, and that was when I woke up, to him kissing me. In my drunken stupor, I was fighting him. Edit. Thank you for trying to help me, but this all happened last September. There's not much I can do about it now. I felt compelled to post, because I had a nightmare about that last night, and even though it happened so long ago, I'm still scared he might be out there. I don't want justice at this point, just someone to listen. Thank you everyone for listening to these stories. I hope you enjoy them. And thank you to all of our channel members: Claire, Casey Brown, Atlas, They Love Jay, No One, Avery Prolks, Antoinette Flowers, Snea Nair, Tyler Aliberti, Francis Egan, Natasha Hovermail, Leslie Jarbath, Caroline Hawksworth, Glenn Williams, Tamaki Amajiki, Thumb, Eric Donter, Selena Stewart, The Grim Reaper's Nightmare, Lisa Lynn, Tangela Young, Miss Cannabis, Anon Q, Mathematica, Carrie Morris, Christy Goodall, Recovery BMX UK, Cherry, Cheryl Taylor Harris, Lindsay Chavez, Flat Booty Biscuits, West Virginia Angel, Jamie Gavisk, Shay Shay, Lexi Lou, Xanax Master, Dark Poison, Michelle Dixon, Spike 2021, Patrick F., Corey Maloney, CC's Castle, Charity McVeigh, Tom H., Jess and Dave McDaniel, Melissa Igandata, Salvador VL, Derek Slank, Randy Music, Brooklyn Ledbetter, Skincrawler, Lisa Thompson, Liz C., Melissa Robinson, Borden Short T., Natasha Strom, Sarah Rodriguez, Melissa Reddy, Kayla Johnston, Skittle Britches, Carolize Von Oswagen, Furberry's Fables, Taryn, Brittany, Hail Mary, Interscare Wifey, Ruby Wilson, Vanita Tillman, Jennifer Moyer, Classic Sonic the Hedgehog, Chili, Cappy Karma, Paul Reese, Thea MashK0101, and Honey Pond. Thank you all for being members. I appreciate it so much. Y'all have no idea. And thank you all for listening to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Now please enjoy the extra rain at the end. Good night, everybody.